What's on? So basically for today's video, I'm gonna be doing a 2023 recap video. So basically with this video, I'm gonna be talking about how 2023 was for me, off camera, on camera, and some of the good moments I had this year and the bad moments I had, and a summary of what this year was like and how I felt about the year. So the first major thing I gotta say about 2023 is this was a really rough year for me, behind the scenes, with mental health and my job situation right now, and also the economy at the moment. So basically at the end of last year, I ended up starting up a new job. I still work at my old job a little bit, but that's only once a week now. I would say it's been really boring, repetitive compared to the experience I had in my old job and the days I was doing school to get my associate's degree. Also, I was doing more day trips back then whenever I was working at my old job and doing school, and whenever I was working more in my old job, is working in a less repetitive, more social environment compared to this new job I've been working at throughout this year. So I feel with a lot of my time that I haven't been filming and editing videos this year, my main focus is kind of revolved around this job this year rather than me doing school and doing YouTube quite as much. And I haven't had the best kind of social life this year either. Where I was going to school and working at my old job, I was able to make friends there and connect with people there. So in general, this has kind of been the loneliest year of my life, even compared to 2020, which is kind of surprising with the whole lockdown happening that year and being hard to really connect with people that year. That year was a pretty lonely year for me, because at least 2020, I still did have some moments where I was connecting with people. I was still working in my old job more often than I am now. And also at the very beginning of 2020, before we kind of got into lockdown, I was still in high school and was able to connect with people there too that year. So also throughout this year, I've been having less time and motivation film and edit YouTube videos. So that's why there's been a lot of moments throughout this year where I've gone a really long time without uploading. There's points where I've gone 2 or more weeks without uploading, and in the past I used to upload twice a week. But also this year I ended up having an earlier end date to the summer uploads compared to throughout the summer 2020 through last summer. So I ended up finishing this year's summer uploads in mid-October. Last year I didn't finish until almost mid-November, and past years it's been I would say late October, early November. So I feel this year's been a really hard year for me, regarding my mental health, due to trying to adjust to this new job and lifestyle of mine. And also my life has been very different from the life that I used to have within the last 4 years. More of a repetitive weekly routine. I feel that stuff has also really affected my mental health this year, making it probably the worst year I've ever had regarding my mental health. I feel this year was even harder with my mental health than 2020 was even. It's also affected my motivation to want to do things outside my job, including YouTube and school as well, and also trying to have friendships and also hanging out with people outside of days I'm working at my job. So it has affected my motivation in a lot of regards of my life, trying to accomplish stuff outside of work. So not only has my mental health been really bad this year, but I feel I've been experiencing really bad burnout throughout this year because of my new job, and the job environment there has also been gradually getting worse and worse throughout the year, and has the motivation to do anything throughout this year is went downhill to the point where I've at some points I stopped caring about almost anything, especially within the last 2 months of this year. So the environment at my new job has just progressively been getting worse every week since when I started. Whenever I started the job, it was really not that bad. It was a pretty fine place, but I feel within the last 2 months of this year, especially the last 2 months of this year, it's just gone really bad, and I've been losing motivation to want to show up too. Not only has the lack of motivation caused me to not want to do stuff as much outside of my job compared to past, especially within the last 2 months, but also having less free time because of my job. It's impacted my lack of uploads throughout this year compared to how many uploads I was having the last 3 years, and it's been hard to find the motivation, the time to want to go back and try to get my bachelor's degree and figure out some kind of career that I want to do. Also hard to find time trying to balance school and also working at this job. So I know I've been kind of talking about some of the bad stuff that's happened to me throughout this year, and how this year has kind of affected me negatively at points, but even though this year was not the greatest year for me, there were still some highlights I had throughout this year. So one of the highlights I had throughout this year was going to Chicago for like my birthday weekend and getting to see that for the first time, checking out places in Chicago. I also did get to go bungee jumping this summer and finally got to try that out for the first time. It was a really awesome experience, and the place I went bungee jumping at was really nice, and the people were really helpful and made sure you were safe and all that, and they were like really friendly as well. It was a fun experience and a fun environment. I did get to go on a couple of Tennessee getaways throughout the summer. I ended up like going on one in late June where I saw one set of parks, and then I ended up like going back out there again late July. And I got to like see some places I didn't get to see the first Tennessee getaways. And then I also went to Branson like late July for like a weekend. I didn't film a whole lot while I was at Branson, but it still ended up like being a really fun, like mostly off camera like trip that I went on this year. And I also did get to go like to a couple different parks within the Ozarks as well. So I did get to do some fun stuff throughout the summer, even though it wasn't quite as great as like past summers I had. I also did get to have a lot of awesome Kincaid Lake visits where one of them I ended up like doing over 50 jumps and got some really cool sunset sessions in where I've gotten to do like 10 sunset jumps, which is more than I've ever done in the past as well. I also was able to go to Smoky Mountains for like a weekend and got to do some hiking there. I didn't do quite as much hiking as I've done like on past Smoky Mountains trips because a lot of like that same energy from the past years wasn't there, but I still did get to do a lot of fun stuff throughout that trip and still did get to do some nice hiking trails and see some places throughout that trip. And last major highlight that I had this year was like getting to do some fun Christmas activities throughout the St. Louis area and getting to go to the Garden Glow place for the first time. Ended up like being a really awesome experience there and really nice lights display, probably the best one I've ever been to before. So those are basically the highlights and like the really good moments I had throughout this year. So okay, so for like the next part of this video, I'm gonna be like doing kind of like a recap on like how I felt about each month this year. So basically with January, I would say that it was like an okay month. I ended up having like another really good like birthday celebration and was able to like go on like a couple of hikes on my actual birthday because we had like really nice weather that day. It was like 65 degrees. It was like a nice way to celebrate my 21st birthday and like a nice birthday present I had, like having nice weather on my birthday and not the really crappy cold weather that you usually have in mid-January. I was able to go to Chicago for like the weekend after my birthday, like MLK weekend, and got to like spend some time there, see the city for the first time, and see like some of the major highlights of the cities. But for like the rest of January though, it was like really boring, monotonous. It was really hectic at my new job. Christmas of 2022 was still kind of hectic throughout January there, especially like the early half of the month. There was also one night, like in the end of January, where I had a really stressful situation, like trying to get home from work. It was like when there was like an unexpected like ice storm that hit while I was working one of the shifts there, and the roads were really awful. Whenever I drove to the place, like the roads were fine. It was just like normal. The ice storm hit while I was working there, and then whenever I got out, the roads were really terrible. It was really icy and slick and all that, so that just ended up being like a really terrible, stressful night. Did not enjoy it at all, especially since like it was a really stressful day at work I had that day, and I was just not really in the mood to have to deal with it after being really exhausted from the shift I was working that day. Overall, I will say that this January was like not as good as like past Januaries, but I ended up having like a really like good stretch of January from like my birthday to MLK Day. So now I'm gonna be moving on to February. So overall, I only had like 2 or so like good days that entire month. It was just a really boring and stressful month for me. I would even say it was like more boring than January. I don't know if it was quite stressful as January, but it was definitely more boring than January was. The month went by like really slow for me, and it was like one of the hardest months for me to get through this year. I did have like a good time like visiting Elephant Rocks one of the days we had. Like it was like another one of those days where it was like really nice out for like the time of year. It was like 70 degrees outside that day, so I went to Elephant Rocks and ended up having a pretty good time there. There was also one day that I ended up like going to Hidden Valley. I think it was like on a Saturday or something like that. But I would say other than like those 2 days, I really hated February this year, especially like the first half of the month with like the Valentine's chaos. So now I'm gonna be like moving on to like how I felt about like March this year. So overall, I would say that was an improvement from like February, although still wasn't that crazy of a month for me. I ended up like having another pretty bad spring break this year. I usually don't have like the best luck with spring break lately. It still wasn't as bad as last year's spring break though. I did get to go on like a really nice day trip at the end of the month, and at least the weather was starting to get nicer throughout the month, and there was like more daylight than there was in February, and it didn't snow one time that entire month too. So I feel like March definitely could have been better, but it still wasn't as bad as like February was, and it definitely was better than March of 2020. So that was basically how I felt about March this year. So basically how I felt about April was that it was like an improvement from March, and it was also improvement from like the rest of winter, I would even say, even January. But still wasn't like too crazy of a month for me. It was a pretty decent month though, and I got to like do a little bit more like spring day trips than I did in March. I ended up like getting to have a day where I enjoyed seeing Giant City again, and a couple of days where I like did some simple stuff around like home. And things were starting to kind of slow down in my workplace as well compared to like any other moment that I have had worked there prior to April. So out of the first 4 months I had this year, I would say that April was probably the best month I had this year so far. So basically how I felt about May is it was not as good as May of last year, but it was a lot better than May of 2021. I did get to like go and visit Starved Rock again, which was the place I checked out for the first time last May, and I did get to go back to like Kincaid Lake a couple of times at the end of the month for like Memorial Day weekend and all that. I would say Memorial Day and the weekend was a pretty decent Memorial Day this year, and like one of the better Memorial Days I've had recently. It was still somewhat slow at my new job, and it was basically around the same as like how I felt about April, maybe a time bit better. I feel like June this year was like a really amazing month for me. It was definitely the best month I had this year. Not only that, but like it was also the slowest month I had at my new job, meaning it was like really easy to like get some time off from there. Because of that, I was able to like go and do some fun things such as Johnson Shut-ins, Castle River, going bungee jumping for the first time, getting to complete like another bucket list activity by doing that. And at the very end of the month, I ended up like going on this really cool like mini getaway to Chattanooga for a couple of days, and it was definitely one of the best Junes I've had in my life, despite most of this year not being the greatest for me. But the only negative thing that really happened throughout that month was like there was like this one day I ended up like having to like replace my car starter, like the one day trip that I tried to do and all that. But other than that, this month was like a really good month for me, and June was definitely my favorite month this year. So basically how I felt about like July this year, it wasn't quite as good as June though, and I would say that like early July and more so mid-July was one of the crappiest moments I had this year. It just really sucked trying to get through like shifts at my new job during that time. It definitely got like significantly like more busy than how things were during June. I also ended up like getting kind of sick around that time period and was having some sinus issues. It was like right after I did like the Fugitive Beach weekend trip, and it was still like within like the really busy time period at my new job, so it just made a really hard time period to get through. And I was still able to do some pretty awesome day trips in July, mainly like the very late part of the month. And I also did get to go to Branson for like a weekend getaway, and I also did get to like do a follow-up trip back out to Chattanooga where I got to like see even more places throughout Tennessee that I didn't get to like see on the first trip that I went out there in like late June. So I would say that July was a pretty okay month this year, though, despite having one of the worst stretches of this year. I feel like late July definitely saved the month, though. I mean, if it weren't for late July, I would have probably had said like July was a really terrible month this year. But so basically how I felt about August is it was probably my least favorite month I had during the summer. But I mean, I still did have some like good moments throughout this month, especially like in the middle of August, where I ended up like getting to do some pretty cool Kincaid Lake visits, and I did get to like do this really nice day trip like out to like some parks in like the Ozarks. Other than that though, I mean, this month was like a really dull, boring month, and it just took like a while to get through, like especially compared to like the other summer months I had. And not just that, but I ended up like experiencing like a really nasty stretch of like excessive heat like towards the end of the month. It was like I would say it was around the 25th of the month. I don't know the exact date this happened, but ended up like having like a really nasty stretch of like excessive heat. So that was not a fun experience, especially with like having to like work at my new job and all that. And even though it was like an indoor building, like you would have like doors open, all that, and the heat would get into the building. So it was nowhere near as good as last August. I mean, last August was like probably one of the best Augusts like that I've had in a really long time. That was like when I did like the Southwest road trip and all that, and I would even say it wasn't as good as like August of like 2020 or 2021 either. Out of any August I've had this decade so far, this is probably my least favorite August, but even then, it still wasn't like the worst month I had this year. And So basically how I felt about September this year, I would say it was like one of the better months I had this year, and honestly it was more enjoyable than July and August were even. Things were like finally starting to slow down at my job again, and it was slower than June was even. Like Labor Day was also really good this year, and I got to enjoy like one last month at Kincaid Lake throughout the month of September, and I also had end up like having more like sessions out there that month than like any other month this year. And also like September last year I was like having to like deal with like all the car problems and getting that taken care of, which I didn't have to deal with this September, so it made this September even better. So I would say that I really liked September this year. It was a really good month for me. October was a really good month for me this year. I think it was probably my second favorite month after June, and it was a little bit better than September, but both months are really good for me. So basically in October, I got to go out to Kincaid Lake like one more time during the very beginning of the month. Then as it like started cooling down outside and it was like more fall-like, I got to do like a lot of awesome fall-themed day trips, similar to like what I did last October. And not only that, but I ended up like getting to go back out to the Smoky Mountains again for a weekend like I did in October 2021. So I kind of like got the best of both worlds from like both the Octobers I had the past 2 years. So I did go to Fright Fest one night, but other than that, like I didn't really do a lot of Halloween stuff this year. So that's probably like the one downside of this October, because past Octobers I did do like some more Halloween themed stuff than this year. So I mean, if you don't include that, I think this is like one of the best Octobers I've had. I would say that September and October were a lot better than past years. So basically how I felt about November was that it was like a significant downgrade from like the last 2 months I had. It was nowhere near as good as like the summer was, or like September and October. This was like the month when my work schedule started to kind of get like out of control again, similar to like what happened last year in November. And to be honest, like the month started off okay for me, but it got really bad like towards the end of the month. It was worse than it was in mid-July even. The amount of day trips I did like really started to like go downhill, and I think I only ended up like doing one day trip the whole month, which was like a place that I went to in early November, and it was like less than an hour from where I live too. So I did not do a lot of day trips throughout the month of November. Also, Thanksgiving this year was like really depressing for me, and I know I didn't have like the greatest Thanksgiving this year or just like throughout the decade so far, but I have to say that this year was probably the worst Thanksgiving I've ever had in my life. Like, it was much worse than last year's even, or I would even say it was like worse than the Thanksgiving we had in 2020 even. So, and that was like a really bad year for holidays as well. November just wasn't the best month for me this year, especially like the second half of it. But I mean, I think it was a little bit better than last year's November other than Thanksgiving. Basically, how I felt about December was, it was a pretty stressful month for me. It was pretty stressful trying to get through like another holiday season at my warehouse job. I didn't end up going back to like that one like rocking chair for like the Christmas season like I have been like the last 3 years, but I did get to do a lot of like other fun Christmas stuff throughout this year, and honestly I think that this December was a lot better than the December I had last year, because December last year I was like absolutely working myself to death at my warehouse job. I ended up like picking up a lot of like extra shifts and all that, and it was just a really chaotic month for me to get through. I haven't been doing as much of that this year, so it's allowed me to be able to do like more Christmas stuff throughout this year as well. The Christmas video that I ended up like having out this year was way better than last year's Christmas video for sure. This year's December still kind of sucked though, and it was still like one of the worst months I had this year, especially with my warehouse job, but I did get to have some good moments this month like outside of that, so I'll definitely take this December over the one I had to go through and experience last year. So that's basically how I felt about like each of the months this year. So basically my favorite season I had this year was probably the fall overall, because summer did have some like pretty bad moments this year, and fall was just like, I feel like the best season all around, even though I did have like a lot of like major highlights in the summer. Like some of my absolute best moments and memories this year were from the summer, but also I did have some really bad things happened during the summer this year, so, and it was not as good as past summer, so I would say that fall was probably the best season for me overall this year. And then basically the worst season for me overall, not really much of a surprise, like considering that it's been the worst season for me throughout the last years. I would say the winter season this year was probably my least favorite season, because January and February weren't like the best for me, and then also like the last 2 months haven't been that great either. So I would say that winter has been probably my worst season this year. So basically how I felt about this year as a whole is I would say that was like a disappointment compared to like the past few years I had, and it was a really like difficult year for me when it came to like my mental health and my job situation. It was a lot more of a repetitive and monotonous year that I had compared to like any other year that I've had this decade so far. I would even say more so than like my high school years and just my school years in general. And I also didn't do as good with YouTube this year as I did like the rest of this decade. This year's summer was also one of the most disappointing summers I've had in a while, other than like the couple of weeks throughout the summer where I did some mini getaways. It was harder to like make memories throughout the summer and find time off. I feel like the year did get better for me though as the year progressed, and I would definitely say like the worst part of 2023 was the early 2023 stretch, and my favorite part was probably the late part of the year. I feel like the year definitely got better as things progressed. I mean, November and December though were kind of like a downgrade from like the summer months and like fall, but for the most part I feel like this year got better as the year progressed. So now I'm gonna be moving on to like goals I met this year and goals I didn't meet this year. So some of the goals I did meet this year was trying out like different places, like going to different parks. I ended up like going to this one park in Kentucky after going bungee jumping. I also went to some new places in Tennessee and checked out some places in southern Missouri and Arkansas, which I've never been to before. And another goal I met this year was me going bungee jumping. And it was actually like one of the goals I didn't think I was going to meet this year, and I was actually surprised I ended up like meeting this goal. So those are basically the two main goals I did meet this year. The first goal that I somewhat met was continuing to do things that made me happy. I did for like some moments of the year, like whenever I like did the Tennessee getaways. Also like going to Smoky Mountains for a weekend, doing bungee jumping for the first time, and other like day trips, Kincaid Lake trips and all that. So I did somewhat like meet that goal. Not so much like when it came to like my new work job and not getting to socialize with people as much as I did like in the past years. Another goal that I only somewhat met was like me continuing to upload more. I did decent from like June to September, and then like again late October for early December, but not so much for like the rest of the year, because I was only like uploading like once a week, sometimes even like less often than that. So not giving up on things even when things got hard for me. I was able to keep myself together in some ways, like not giving up on my new job. Even when it got like really frustrating, draining, and I didn't feel like going in, I was able to somewhat keep myself together with that. But I felt like giving up on a lot of other things throughout this year, like consistency on YouTube, trying to have social connections with people, and going back to college and getting more than an associate's degree there. I also was kind of giving up on flips throughout the winter and early spring. Gave up on doing backflips, but I have like started to make some progress with doing better flips again. I'm not where I was with flips like 1 year ago around this time. So I would say that goal I only somewhat met, because I feel like I did give up on a lot of things this year and wasn't doing as good with like other life aspects besides my job throughout this year compared to like past years this decade. So like probably more so not meeting the goal than actually meeting it. So, and then basically the goals I didn't meet this year. The first major goal that I didn't meet this year, I didn't meet the goal of like going harder with the summer adventures, because I didn't do quite as much like day trips as I did like during past summers, or even throughout the other seasons as well, maybe other than fall. I also didn't meet the goal of like doing another road trip this year. I wasn't able to like make it work out this year where I could be gone for like 2 weeks straight with my new job and all that, but I did get to do like some smaller 2-day getaways this year spread out. So, and pretty obviously I didn't meet the goal of like making this year better than any other year I've had this decade. To be completely honest, I would have to say that this would probably been my least favorite year that I've had this decade so far, so I for sure did not meet that goal this year. I mean, it wasn't like all bad, but I would still have to say it's probably been one of my least favorite years I've had in a while. So some of the main goals I have for next year. My first main goal for next year is to try out some more like different places throughout the summer and like do another mini getaway either back to Tennessee or somewhere else like drivable in a day. Another goal that I have for next year is like do the one like swing at the Whirlwind Gorge Bridge that someone suggested to me on the day I bungee jumped. I'd like to maybe try to do that next year, but I don't know if it's going to be like fully possible or not. But then again, I didn't think I was even gonna go bungee jumping this year. So another goal that I have for like next year is to like go hard for the summer adventures and be able to travel more and possibly like try to go out to like the Northeast or like extended West Coast like US trip with a combination of like the North and the Southwest, like stuff that I did on the 2021 and 22 road trip, like not everything, but like maybe do some West Coast stuff and all that. So another goal that I have for next year is to make this year a much better year than 2023 and try to like make it better than like any other year I had this decade. That didn't go so well for me this year, but hopefully it does next year. Even if it isn't better than every year I've had this decade so far, or like not better than 2022, I at least want to make it better than 2023 was. So another goal I have is to like get back into college again and figure out something with a degree and try to like work on getting my bachelor's degree. I'm probably not going to get it by the end of 2024, but at least like work towards getting it. So another goal that I have for myself next year is like don't give up on anything, even when it gets like really stressful and difficult. I'm hoping to like do a lot better than I did this year with stuff. So I also have a goal to like try to be able to do backflips again, at least like on the trampoline. I mean, maybe even on ground if I get that far, but at least like try to do them on a trampoline again. Another goal I have is to like have a better work situation than what I experienced this year and to just be able to like get out of my warehouse job next year and go back to like working a different job again or working at my old job again, even if I do make less money. So those are basically the main goals I have for myself in 2024. So hope you enjoyed today's video and basically getting to hear like my full input on like how I felt about 2023 and like all the good stuff I experienced this year and like all the bad stuff I experienced this year and stuff that's happened to me throughout this year off camera that I didn't like document about throughout the year. So I don't film about like every single thing I'm like experiencing at the moment throughout the year, and like I don't film at work and what my work life is like. So I hope you guys had a decent 2023, and even if you didn't, like it was a rough year for you as well. I hope that 2024 is a much better year than 2023 was, and good things happen to all you in 2024, and it just ends up being a better year than this year was. So I do hope you enjoyed today's video and all the videos I did make throughout 2023, even though like this really wasn't like my greatest year on YouTube. Subscribe and keep my post notifications on to see what I do next. Stay tuned for videos I make throughout 2024, and I hope you guys have like a good New Year's this year. And without further ado, I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Go!